So what the messages that we have today for ministers do, in fact, represent a consensus of stakeholders. And perhaps most important, I'd like to point out that we have very deliberately this year included groups and individuals and organizations who have not been involved in the CCS discussion before. And to punctuate the need for communication, CSLF itself needs to reach out to a broader group of stakeholders and involve in the conversation organizations and people who have not yet been involved in this discussion. So let me begin by my substantive remarks by pointing out from the stakeholder perspective, there are some who would argue that CCS is not needed. There are some who would argue that the world can meet its climate goals by the middle part of the century without CCS. The stakeholder perspective would be that those who have that belief are living in a fantasy world that is completely unattainable. And if there's some of you in this room who hold that belief, that CCS is unimportant and unnecessary, I don't intend to be insulting, but you are living in a fantasy world. It is impossible, it's impossible for the world to meet its climate goals without effectively deploying carbon capture and storage. And the heart of this issue is the myth that some people believe that we're not going to use fossil fuels. Some people believe that we won't have to use fossil fuels by the middle part of the century. The World Energy Council scenario study, which was released at the WEC Congress in Daegu, Korea last month, several of you I know were there, WEC laid out two scenarios, the symphony scenario and the jazz scenario. In the symphony scenario, fossil fuels comprise 59% of the world energy consumption in 2050. In the jazz scenario, fossil fuels provide 77% of energy consumption in 2050. So the notion that fossil fuels are not going to be utilized is just a myth that we need to lay out and dispel. So how does the world then achieve a 50% reduction in CO2 emissions and an 80% reduction in OECD countries? And in having that aspirational goal that's so critical, how do we also bring 1.5 billion people out of energy poverty, people, citizens of the world who today don't have access to electricity, don't have access to transportation fuels, and at the same time aspire to the lifestyle that all of us enjoy? And similarly, how do we deal with the other 1.5 billion people who have inadequate access to energy sources? They don't have affordable, reliable, available supplies of energy. Now, all of you know the answer to this question, and it's no surprise, and that is we need it all. We need to deploy every type and every volume of renewable energies that we can. We need to take advantage and deploy the full array of options before us in terms of nuclear energy. We need to deploy and take advantage of our vast resources of every variety of fossil fuels. And that, I believe, is what we're going to see that we're going to do. We need it all, and we need it to be affordable. We need it to be reliable. We need it to be sustainable. We need our energy supplies to contribute to energy security, and we need our energy supplies to contribute to job creation. Carbon capture and storage fits every one of these attributes. 10 years ago, when we were involved in organizing the first CSLF ministerial meeting, we concluded that on a very high note of optimism. Over the past few years, we've seen setbacks primarily driven by the financial crisis. The financial crisis has not only interfered with government budgets being available to support CCS projects, but corporations finding that they were not in a position where they could take on the risk associated with major investments in CCS.